Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Chop It Up. We have a special guest on the show today. Once again, our NFL insider, our NBA insider, really our insider for everything we talk about on the show, Kaleb Unger from Quad Culture. Caleb, thank you for coming on, man. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Anytime we have a celebrity football player absolutely drop in the draft for extremely mysterious reasons, I'm here. It proves why the NFL is the best reality TV show to ever exist.
Caleb already hinted at it. If you've seen the title of this episode, you already know what we're going to be talking about. Shedeur Sanders falling to the fifth round, going to the Cleveland Browns. Just a true disaster for the Shedeur Sanders fan base, if you will. But before we get into that, we're going to go over winners and losers of the NFL draft regarding teams as a whole, not necessarily players. Let's start off with the winners. Let's get this show going on a positive note. Caleb, who did you think really won the first 3 days or the only 3 days of the NFL draft?
Yeah, so right off the bat, first team that came to my mind is one that me and you are very near and dear to because of our position in the world, is the Seattle Seahawks. I thought they did a really good job. They addressed a lot of needs. Like that they went guard. I mean, that's a position they went for in the first round. Got a pass catching tight end. Got Torrey Horton out of Colorado State, which I think is a really good pickup at wide receiver to kind of just help bolster their core. And then Jalen Milrow. I think he is the classic kind of guy where you're like, I mean, he can sit on your bench. He can do the Joe Milton thing last year where he throws a couple balls in camp and everybody's like, hey, maybe this guy's got something. But eventually fans are going to forget about him. And then maybe in 3 years, he can be your starting quarterback. I think it's a very high reward, low risk type move. So I really liked what the Seahawks did. I really liked all their things. They also drafted a fullback. And if anybody knows me, they know I'm a strong proponent of drafting a fullback at any time because bring the fullbacks back to the NFL. That's all I'm saying. Those dudes are the best. Who came to your mind? Who were you like winner?
When I went through each team and kind of what they went through and who they went with early on, maybe some sleepers that they had later in the draft, first team that comes to mind for me, also near and dear to our hearts because we're their biggest fans, the New England Patriots. I thought the Patriots had a really strong draft. I think Will Campbell at number four, I think that's the best pick you could take in that position. Obviously, having Travis Hunter off the board and Abdul Carter, obviously you don't need a quarterback, so it's not like we were hoping for Cam Ward or anything. I think the Will Campbell pick is awesome. I think that's what
Yeah.
most people expected. But for me, it's really what they did after that that made this draft so enticing because for years and years, Patriots fans have been saying, we need weapons. We need exciting guys to watch. We need people that you can give the ball to and they can make plays. And they went out and did that immediately after helping Drake May in the trenches. They go out and they get Travion Henderson, the running back from Ohio State. If you haven't watched tape of this guy, go out there and do it. He can do it all. He can run through your face. He can juke you out of your shoes. He's a really good receiving back, which is something I don't think a lot of people really know. And when you have a running back already in the room like Ramondre Stevenson, a guy who's typically running in between the tackles, bringing in a guy like Travion Henderson who can get to the outside, has that blazing speed that we saw in that legendary Rose Bowl game this season, really adds a proponent to this Patriots offense that I don't think they've had in a really long time, maybe going back to like the Rex Burkhead days. And then after that, you get some wide receivers. You get Kyle Williams, a guy from Washington State. I've actually watched quite a bit of Kyle Williams in my college football experience, believe it or not. This guy's a stud. He can play. He's got some wheels. He's a deep ball threat, which I love. And so for me, the Patriots, when we talked earlier before the draft, we said they got to address the offensive line and they got to get weapons. And they're able to do that. And I'm really excited for what these guys can do. So Patriots, my first team that I felt like won the draft. Who else for you felt like gained some steam this last weekend?
Yeah, just one more thing on the Patriots. I was a little reluctant on the whole Will Campbell experience just because I was like, dang, I kind of really want this to be a little bit more exciting. But when he sat up there and said, I will fight and die for Drake May, I was sold in. I was all sold on Campbell. I was like, you're my guy. I'm gonna fight and die for you. So now when everybody makes it like a T-Rex joke, I don't let it slide. I don't let that slide.
I would rather have an offensive tackle with small hands and a big heart than an offensive lineman with small heart and big hands. If you put it that think about it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. 100%. The other team that I wanted to go with was the Las Vegas Raiders. You get a really dynamic player in Genty, a guy who really I think fits the mentality that Pete Carroll is going to want to bring to this team. You get Jack Beach in the second round, a guy who I think not only was he a really good player, but as he talked about a lot, his story is obviously really tragic with his brother and everything. But the fact that he's playing for two, so he's motivated to bring his brother's legacy to his play. I think you're going to see a guy who's going to who already was a player who I think gave 100%, who's going to be giving even a little bit more. And so I thought that was really good. And then as you get into the later rounds, I mean, I'm a huge proponent of anybody that reaches into the FCS as somebody who's from Montana and as somebody who has gotten a lot of time to watch Tommy Mellott out of Montana State. He's not going to be a quarterback. He is going to be some sort of athlete for them, but you're looking at a guy who can run the ball really, really well, who has experience playing multiple sports, playing or he kick returned his freshman year in college. He's just a really tremendous athlete. I mean, obviously he ran a 4.39 at his pro day and did like I think a 41-inch vertical jump, which is pretty good if you're just a receiver. And so I think anytime you can get a guy like that in the sixth round, a guy who I think could make really dynamic plays for you, and from everything that I've heard, is an extremely smart player. So then you're putting a guy out there playing wide receiver who has that quarterback mindset. I really like this draft for the Raiders, and I think there's a lot of really quality things that they're doing. And so the Raiders are my second winner.
Obviously, I just want to touch on this for a second, but the Raiders, they draft Tommy Mellott, but then they also go get Cam Miller from North Dakota State. Were you surprised by that move? I know a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people thought it was weird. You get two quarterbacks. Obviously, like you said, sounds like Mellott's going to do a little bit more than just throw the ball around. Did you think it was a good move? Did you think it was a weird move? Obviously, I don't think it's a make or break situation for Oakland or Vegas, excuse me. But what
Mm-hmm.
do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it really just affirmed the fact that Tommy Mellott is not going to play quarterback really at all. I mean, maybe there'll be a scenario sometime down the road where, you have an emergency situation where he has to play quarterback, and that's great. But I think with his athleticism, at Montana State, he was pretty solid at throwing the ball. He wasn't really anything special. I think what really showed was his athleticism and his leadership. And so I think that's what you see. You've seen this thrown around a lot. He's a Julian Edelman type. And so I think that's his career trajectory. I doubt he gets any snaps at quarterback when he's, going into training camp and practice and rookie mini camp. I think he's all on at receiver. So I didn't even really view that as a weird thing. I just viewed it as, oh, they took a receiver and then they took quarterback.
I kind of had a similar thought process as that. Obviously, you don't really draft two quarterbacks back to back necessarily. Maybe unless you're the Cleveland Browns, which we'll get into here in a little bit. My other winner that I had was the New York Giants. Now, this was interesting. I didn't know if I want to have them or if I wanted to have them in the winners category necessarily, but I thought they did some really nice things. I think Abdul Carter at three is a great pick. As long as he can stay healthy and he can stay on the field, I think he's going to be a force to be reckoned with, along with the rest of that Giants defensive line. When you have guys like Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau, who it looks like they're going to bring back. When you have those four guys rushing the passer play after play after play, that's going to be a force to be reckoned with. And that's not just talking for the NFC East, but the NFL as a whole. That's going to be a real problem to deal with. I don't think that means that the Giants win 4 or 5 more games, but I think it means that they're starting to build an identity with the defensive side of the football. And hopefully, eventually, at some point, that bleeds over to the offensive side. And speaking of offense, they drafted Jackson Dart. I know you're a huge Jackson Dart guy. Traded up to get him. I was shocked. When I saw the Giants traded up, I was 100% positive that Shedeur was going. For them to trade up for Jackson Dart, really interesting. I go back and forth on Jackson Dart. When he's on, I love to watch him. He's fired up. I think he can do a lot of great things. But I think he also struggles to keep his head on straight. And when you're in the NFL, no matter how good of a play you make or how bad of a play you make, you have to be able to stay level headed. What move did you think, or what did you think of the move for the Giants trading up to go get Dart at 21?
Yeah, I kind of saw McShay was talking about it a little bit. Just this idea that it's way better to go into that press conference and be like, and our third pick, Abdul Carter, and our 26th pick, Jackson Dart. There's just a huge discrepancy in how you announce those things, the pressure that he's going to go into. Obviously, he's in New York. Obviously, it's going to be a high pressure thing, but I think he's going to get the opportunity to sit behind whether it's Russell Wilson or Jameis Winston, whoever, because I think one of those guys is going to be their starter come the beginning of the year. So I think Jackson Dart's going to get some time. I think Brian Dayball has shown that he can work really well with quarterbacks, and Jackson Dart is a talented quarterback. Obviously, I really like him. I really like a lot of his grit as a player. I like a lot of his kind of just raw athleticism. But I do think one thing that does scare me a little bit about him is he played in a Lincoln Riley offense and he played in a Lane Kiffin offense. And those offenses have produced really good quarterbacks in the NFL, but they've also produced a lot of guys who look really good because the offense and the scheme really plays guys open. And so Jackson Dart, gritty player, decent athleticism. We'll see. I mean, if you're Joe Shane and Brian Dayball, this is like a good attempt, right? You didn't sell the farm to get a quarterback early, but you did take a chance, and maybe it helps your job security moving forward. So for those guys, I think it makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, in order for the Giants to have any success, you have to have an identity at quarterback. Whether Dart starts this year or not, I think to be able to learn from guys like Jameis and Russell, as interesting as it is to say that, I think it is, those are guys that have been there before. Russ has a Super Bowl ring. Jameis has been in the league for a really long time. That'll be a fun quarterback room, to say the least. Another person I want to mention that the Giants drafted fourth round pick number 3, Cam Scatterbu, Arizona State. That's a steal, in my opinion, number 4. He's not going to be their starting running back,
Yeah.
most likely. But in a third and short goal line situation, I'm not sure that there's another guy that I would want, maybe outside of Ashton Genty. I mean, this guy's physical. He can run guys over, and he just kind of fits the identity that this Giants team's looking for. He's tough. He's nasty. He'll get in your face, and I really think the Giants can use a guy like that. Not all the time, but I think in certain context, he'll be able to be very useful in Daboll's offense. Let's get into the losers. Let's talk about some teams that maybe struggled a little bit in the NFL draft. There's some interesting moves, to say the least. I'll let you go ahead and kick it off, though.
I'm going to go on with one that maybe people haven't really been talking about that much. And I think that kind of proves a little bit that they didn't really win the day. And that's the Dolphins. I looked at the Dolphins as a team that was already sort of kind of in decline, and they didn't really do anything that made me that excited. They got the second best defensive tackle from Michigan. You get a guard in the second round out of Arizona. And I mean, these guys could be really solid players, but there's not really anything that makes me feel like this team's going to take the next step. This team has been living in mediocrity or just above average land, and they didn't make any moves to get any better. I mean, Quinn Ewers, maybe he beats out Zach Wilson in a quarterback competition. I mean, there's just a lot of picks here that just don't really do anything for me. The one pick I did like is Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State. I think that's a guy who could do some damage, who could play well at running back for them, especially behind Devon Achane. But that's pretty much it. I mean, I looked at the Miami Dolphins and I said, it was almost like I forgot that they were drafting, and I think that's kind of a bummer for them.
Yeah, I feel like the Dolphins are one of those teams where they have a lot of work to do. Tyreek Hill's not getting any younger. Obviously, you still have Jalen Waddle on the other side of the ball, but the defense was really bad last year, and Tua keeps getting his head knocked off. So eventually, you have to be able to find an identity. I know they get Ewers later on there in the seventh round, but they didn't do anything that really jumped off the charts to me either. My first loser, excuse me, was the San Francisco 49ers. I didn't love what this team did in the draft. They addressed some things defensively that I did like. Obviously, they lost a lot of players this offseason in free agency, so you have to be able to fill those holes on the defensive side of the ball. But let's not forget, this organization just traded Debo Samuel, a month or two ago. Brandon Ayuk's going to be out for an extended period of time with injury. And so outside of an aging George Kittle, where do you really go if you're Brock Purdy? Christian McCaffrey is always off and on in terms of injury. When he's healthy, he's great. There's no debating that. But he's hurt more often than not. And so what do they do to address the offensive side of the ball? Not a whole lot. I know they picked up, I think, a running back and a receiver in the later rounds, But that's not really going to do it for you. I know like Jordan James, excuse me, was the guy they
Mm-hmm.
got from Oregon. But if that's, your offensive weapon that you're adding in the draft, I just don't love that move for them. I would have liked them to be a little bit more aggressive on the offensive side of things. Maybe go try to get a receiver, maybe try to trade up for a guy. But just wasn't really impressed with what San Francisco did.
Yeah, I mean, you go. I think your five first picks are defensive players. And I think you have a guy in Robert Saleh who can do a lot with less, and so it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. One pick that I did want to shout out again, just because I always got to shout out my Montana guys. Junior Bergen out of the University of Montana. That guy's going to make that football team. I'm just saying it now. He's an elite level kick and punt returner. I think he averaged 20 yards per punt return this last year, which is absolutely insane. And so they've been pretty weak on special teams over the last couple of years. And so I think adding that element to their team will be extremely helpful. But I agree with you. I mean, you draft Curtis Rourke, you draft Jordan James, Jordan Watkins, just not a lot of exciting picks, just a lot of kind of meh.
Hidden gem there with the Montana guy. I like that. I like that. Finding some diamonds in the rough here on Chop
I
It
got
Up
this.
today.
I got to show some love to my boys from the Big Sky State.
No doubt. Can't blame you there. My second loser is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. They had some picks that I did like. I think Derek Harmon's going to be really good. Obviously, that's a tragic situation there with him losing his mom the same night he gets drafted. So prayers up for him. I think Caleb Johnson, the running back from Iowa, he's a stud. He can do a little bit of everything. Watched him play some ball for the Hawkeyes this last year. But the quarterback situation for the Steelers is an absolute disaster. Aaron Rodgers has this organization wrapped around his fingers, and they go and draft Will Howard, which that's a great college quarterback. He's a great system guy at Ohio State when you're throwing to five-star wide receivers and handing the ball off to two second-round picks. But if Will Howard's your quarterback and that's your starting quarterback as of now on the roster, you're in a real problem. And even if Aaron Rodgers does go there, I don't think that's going to put this team over the edge. I think at this point in his career, he's, obviously not that mobile. We saw him struggle with New York. And so if an aging 41, 42-year-old quarterback, whatever it is, if that's who you're depending on to, put you over the edge, then I'm just not super confident in this team. And they didn't address really any of those quarterback needs in the draft. Obviously, there wasn't a ton of prospects that stood out, but they could have at least they had an opportunity to draft Shedeur. I don't think, he was going to be their saving grace, but at least that's an option of a guy that can play at an elite level. And for them to just wait and wait and wait and then get Will Howard, I just don't love that for them.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting draft, and I really like the way that you described it because I actually really liked their draft. I liked Derek Harmon. I like Caleb Johnson. I love Jack Sawyer for them. I think that's a place that really develops edge rushers, and I think especially playing opposite T.J. Watt, and I think it's Highsmith. I think he's going to excel there as just sort of a rotational pass rusher, which I think is really awesome for them. So I like their picks, but you go into this draft with Mason Rudolph as your starting quarterback, and you basically just gave Aaron Rodgers every bit of leverage in the world. And it just doesn't make any sense, right? Shadeur's sitting there in front of you for so long. At least reach for a dynamic quarterback. Give yourself some sort of leveraging point, give yourself some sort of future. And it just feels like, you know, great. If Mike Tomlin goes 9-8 with Mason Rudolph, that's awesome. But like at some point, you got to go for something. You got to try for something. And so I agree. I kind of toggled with these guys because I was like, oh, I like all these early picks, but he didn't do anything. And so I think I struggle with that a lot.
Did you have any other losers that you'd like to mention from the draft? I know there's some other teams that, maybe didn't necessarily win, didn't lose, but kind of just stayed in that pool of mediocrity. Was there anyone else for you that you felt kind of had a bad weekend?
I think this will help our transition really quick to our next topic because I mean the audience might not know, but I know what we're talking about next. Which is the Cleveland Browns. They're same situation. Loved Mason Graham. He was one of my favorite players from this draft. Carson Schweschinger, another good player. Quinshawn Junkins, great running back for Nick Chubb. I mean, you make good choices, but then you go out and you get Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, and now I'm feeling like the Cleveland Browns are going to have four different starting quarterbacks this year, and it just this team just reeks of a team that's not going to be good. And I don't know. I think I found myself really frustrated with their approach, especially since day one and day two were really good all the way up until the Gabriel pick.
We're going to touch on the Browns in a minute because we're going to get into some Shedeur talk. But before we get there, I want to address the New Orleans Saints. I actually liked what they did with some of their picks. I think that, they made some really interesting moves. I just had one bullet point under the Saints, and it just says Tyler Shuck. Why would you ever draft that guy?
That's how you
I
sell
don't
it.
care if it's the seventh round. I would never draft Tyler Shuck. I just saw a clip of him the other day rolling out to his right. Defensive end's chasing him, has a chance to throw it away, has a chance to dump it off to the tight end, throws an underhand flip pass, just like he was throwing a softball to a toddler, right into a linebacker's arms. I mean, if I was a GM, if I was a coach, offensive coordinator, whatever, and I saw that on film, immediately scratching his name off of any draft board. I just don't understand it. And like I already said, I don't think Shedeur is going to be anything crazy in the NFL, but I would take him 12 times over and over before I ever took Tyler Shuck. And so for him to go as early as he did, I think it's an absolute disaster for a team that still doesn't really have an identity at quarterback. I just don't love that move. I know Kellen Moore is a great offensive mind, but I mean, you can't help yourself if you're drafting Tyler Shuck in the second round. I don't care who you are.
I think it's a classic NFL like buyer beware situation, right? Because I mean, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I watch every snap of every game in college football, but I am a pretty big proponent of if you're going to draft a quarterback, I would like for like 60% of my fan base to maybe know who they were by the end of the college football season. And that's not a slight on him. I know he's had injuries and stuff like that, but like really, I mean, I think even you have these guys that come out of these small schools that even people know when they get drafted. And so I think it's really frustrating that you see guys like this every single year. I mean, these guys that go into workouts and it's like, oh, they're football mind and look at how well they threw the ball without any pads on. And you're like, yeah, but what did they do when they had the pads on when they were playing in the game? I mean, I find that pick frustrating because it's like, why are we drafting these guys in like off of their off-season performance? Like that's never been a good recipe, but I mean, I could go on about that forever.
Well, yeah, and you just said it. He's a perfect example of, he's not that great from August to January, but he looks really, really good from February to April. The perfect combine baby. He has a great deep ball. He has a great private workout in Louisville in his own indoor facility. And he didn't look that great at the combine. I vividly remember turning on the TV to watch the quarterbacks throw, and he overthrows a dude 5 yards down the field and just an ugly looking pass. And so for me, I just don't understand why you would ever take a guy that early. I'd much rather, get a veteran on a minimum contract who can stay there for a year as a rental and just wait because, you never want to put the cart before the horse. But next year's draft has the potential to be a lot better than this one at the quarterback position. So at worst, you build other positions and you just kind of tank the QB room for a little bit. And so to go out there and get Shuck, I just don't love that move. But
Yeah.
let's get into the main event of this episode. Shedeur Sanders. He falls to the fifth round, goes to the Cleveland Browns, who took Dylan Gabriel 2 rounds before him. I mean, this is just an absolute disaster. It's a bad look. He gets the prank call the same day from the Saints. Well, not actually. It was the Falcons defensive coordinator's kid, but nevertheless, just a really bad look for a guy that couldn't have had more confidence heading into this offseason draft process. What do you make of this?
Yeah. I think I found myself, I think I sent you a text and I was like, this is just kind of ridiculous. We've seen guys do legitimately terrible things, like, and get drafted on day two. Like, I don't care if he came across as cocky in his interview. Like, that's a terrible excuse to not draft a guy. Like the NFL humbles people in unique ways, and I just saw teams take quarterbacks that shouldn't have been taken ahead of him. The Jalen Milroe pick I can rationalize just because he seems like that seems like way more of like a stash type thing. I mean, he's got a lot of different talents. He's got a lot of raw skills that I think need time to be refined. And so I think he has a way higher upside than Shedeur. And so I found that pick to make sense just because Jalen Milroe has a lot of talent. He has a lot of pedigree. He's a really good football player. From what I understand, he's a really smart football player. But I just I saw Shedeur legitimately get kicked around all season and just keep coming back and just keep playing football. And like you can tell me that Travis Hunter was on his team, but there's a lot of teams that have had elite receivers that have gotten drafted that weren't that good. And Colorado was pretty decent this year. And so I think for a guy who has taken his licks, I think I'm okay with him being a little bit cocky because he did. He played well. I'd rather have my quarterback, think he's the guy than, not, be super humble and not really know what he's doing. I don't know. I just found it really confusing. I think if I'm him, I'm really frustrated that the Browns took me because I think if he falls like whatever it was, like a couple more slots, the Raiders pick him. And so I think it's just one of those situations where you're like, I'm being put in a bad position because, like I said, if you told me that Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, and Shedeur Sanders are all going to play this year, I'd be like, for sure, 100%. And so I just thought it was ridiculous. I don't understand it. Maybe there'll be a tell-all in 10 years where we'll understand what Shedeur did to make him fall, but it just doesn't make sense.
Heading into the whole process, I know a lot of people were like, Shedeur should be the number two pick. He should go to the Giants or, the Jaguars or whoever needs a quarterback. Shedeur's a top five pick, guaranteed. I was never on that bandwagon. I was more of in the mindset that, he could fall anywhere from 7 or 8 to 22, and he's going to fall somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
I think that's probably where his true draft stock is. And at the very, very worst, he was going to be a top five pick on day two. And for him to fall all the way to the fifth round to Cleveland, that's just a disaster. And so when I look at this draft, let's break it down quarterback by quarterback. I don't think he's better than Cam Ward. And that's saying something because I don't think Cam Ward's going to be that great either. But I understand taking Ward before him. Then you get Dart. I really don't understand that at all. If you're going to take two guys who were good in
Yeah.
college and both could make plays, but also made some really bad plays, at least go with the guy that shows that he's a little bit maybe pro ready. He's used to being under pressure due to poor offensive line play. He's used to, having to throw, the ball in tough situations compared to a guy who played in a scheme where all his receivers were wide open. And so I think Shedeur is a little bit more pro ready than Jackson Dart. And then you go down the line. The Milrow pick, I understand a little bit, like you said. But Dylan Gabriel and Tyler Shuck, that makes no sense to me. And then just looking at the Browns specifically, you have Flacco and Kenny Pickett. They're on 1 year deals. So you're under the impression they're going to go get someone at some point. But if you're going to draft Gabriel, at least ride with him. Don't take another guy 24 hours later that's going to put even more pressure on him. It just doesn't make sense to do that, in my opinion, because now you're going to head into training camp.
Yeah.
You're going to have the media, trying to divide Gabriel and Shedeur because that's what they do. And obviously knowing how Shedeur handles himself, there's a good chance that that's going to be an issue. So not only do you have Pickett and Flacco, who are under the impression that they're going to be fighting for a starting job, you also have this battle for, the backup slot or the third string position between two rookies. And so to me, the Browns just made this huge mess by themselves. And I have no idea where it goes from here.
Yeah. And I found myself just really frustrated with the dialogue after the draft. Just a lot of like, oh, well, he's super cocky and he's super this and he's super that. And it was all these people that had him going early in mock drafts. And so it just didn't make sense to me. I'm not a Shedeur expert. I don't know everything about his life. I don't know. I've never met him, so I don't know. But looking at a dude who basically helped the resurgence of a Colorado program that was dead before he got there. And yes, his dad plays a role in that, and Travis Hunter obviously plays a role in that. But quarterback in college is getting to be a pretty dang important position too. And so, looking at a guy who did that, who his teammates seem to like him, which I always think matters. I mean, if anybody's seen the movie Draft Day, I mean, it matters if your teammates show up to your birthday party. And so I just think Shedeur is a guy who has proven himself. And we talked about it. I don't think when we did that pod a couple weeks ago, I mean, I think if you told us, hey, something happens, Shadeur's been over, viewed, he's going to go in the second or third round, I would be like, okay, fair. That's fine. This is a one quarterback in the first round kind of draft, and maybe there's a bigger gap than even I thought there was. But I just find it ridiculous. I actually found myself upset for Shedeur that I was like, this just feels wrong. Like, what did he do to fall to this length? And I have a lot of confidence in him as just a quarterback, as a solid quarterback. I've always viewed him as a guy who, at minimum, can probably be a backup in the league for 10 years. I just think he's really solid. Like, we talked about this a little bit before. He doesn't have a lot of traits that you're like physically that you're like, oh man, like he's not going to run all over the field and make big plays, or he doesn't have exactly a rocket arm, but he runs his offense and he runs his offense well. And so I think there's got to be something to that. I think there's got to be something to the fact that he has had a lot of attention on him his entire life, from when he was on in high school to at Jackson State, all the way to Colorado. Like, the spotlight's always been on him, and I think we've seen a lot of people get drafted a lot higher who have handled the spotlight a lot worse. And so I don't know. That's my rant. I mean, I think it's ridiculous. I was frustrated. I still am.
Yeah, it's crazy how fast the script flipped on him, right? And from my perspective, like I said earlier, I wasn't super high on Shadeur, but at the very least, I think he can be a mediocre quarterback in today's NFL. At his best, I think he can be a middle of the road B tier kind of starter. And so for me, looking at this, he doesn't go on day one. I go, okay, a little weird, but I understand it. And for him not to go in the first 10 to 15 picks of that second round, I just said something has to be legitimately wrong. And then you see the domino effect. And I think in the NFL, something that people don't realize is that a lot of times it's a reactive draft. Teams tend to react to what other teams are doing, obviously. So if you're the GM of, the Raiders or the Saints, and you see the Giants trade up for Dart, and then you see some other guys go before Shedeur, you're not going to be like, oh, something, I should take Shedeur Sanders. You're going to assume that something's wrong. You're going to assume that something's going south. But for him to fall all the way to the fifth round, I mean, that's just something that I didn't really expect to happen. I don't think anyone did. And so there must have been something in those meetings that went seriously, seriously wrong, because for him
Yeah.
just to be a little cocky and say a couple of smart aleck comments in his interviews, that's not a good reason to fall to the fifth round. And that's not smart if you're an organization. Sure, if the guy's an a-hole, maybe you lose some respect for him, but you bring him in, you humble him, and you get him accustomed to your culture. You don't, let him fall to the fifth round and you go take a guy who can't complete a 7-yard slant. And so for me, it's really interesting because I'm not some pro Shedeur huge fanboy, but at the same time, I'm not a fan of stupid organizations. And so for him to the fall to the fifth round, it just doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I think this whole Brown situation will be really interesting. I expect him to start a couple games for the Browns and at the very least make an appearance in a few. I think the first half of the season, you really see Flacco and Pickett take a majority of the reps on the field. And then after that, maybe you sprinkle in some Dylan Gabriel. But for the most part, I think it will be the Shedeur show in the second half of the season. And that will be really interesting to watch. So before we get out of here, we're going to let you go here soon. What
Um,
other closing comments do you have? Yeah, go ahead.
can I get? I've like just one thing that I want to get your thoughts on, and then another thing, like a scenario based question. The receiver out of Arizona, right? McMillan, is that his last name?
Yeah,
Uh, I think you're looking at a guy who quite literally during the entire draft process, they're like, this guy takes plays off. This guy sometimes relaxes on the backside of plays. And you're looking at guys like edge rushers that go, who they're like, yeah, this guy has some effort problems and things like that. And these are guys that are getting taken like at 7. You're taking guys with effort problems at 7, and some guy like, I just, like I said, maybe there's going to be a tell-all and we're going to learn something about Shedeur that we never knew. But I mean, it's got to be something gnarly for that, for like, because we saw guys get taken way higher. And the other thing is, so Dylan Gabriel gets taken higher. Oregon's just as good if Shedeur Sanders plays for that team, right?
they're better. They're
Or you
better if he
swap
plays
them.
for them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so I just think it's one of those things where it doesn't make sense. It's kind of nonsense. But I mean, that's the NFL draft for you. I think, dumb organizations make dumb decisions, and That's why, unlike the NBA where there's a little bit more movement, just because organizations are just moving all the time, we get to see the organizations like the Browns do pretty bad all the time.
Yeah, no, I'm agree with you there. The Dylan Gabriel pick made no sense to me. I was going to assume he was a fifth, sixth round guy. For him to even go before Ewers, I was surprised about that as late as Ewers went. And so not only do you draft one quarterback who is going to be mediocre at best, then you bring in Shedeur, who is either, has a potential to absolutely flop or could be a Hall of Famer, according to Mel Kiper, who threw an absolute temper tantrum on set at the NFL draft. And
Yeah.
so it just raises these weird questions. And I already talked about this with the Flacco and Pickett. You still have Deshaun Watson on contract. You paid him a boatload of money. He just tore his Achilles for the second time. Like this quarterback room is a disaster. Do you cut Gabriel? Do you somehow find a way to trade Pickett? Like, do you just ride with four guys and you leave Deshaun Watson on the IR? Like, I just have no idea what you do here.
So if you're the Browns and you're sitting there and you're like, man, for some reason Shedeur is dropping. Maybe something happened and we shouldn't take him because maybe there's something wrong with his character. And then you look at your roster and you see Deshaun Watson. Do you feel a bit hypocritical? Because I think you would. I would feel like you would just a little bit. So I don't know. I was like that's just another thing where it's like you have Deshaun Watson on your roster and you're like, yeah, we can't take this guy because he's a little cocky.
Yeah, I mean, if Deshaun Watson's a guy you bring in and you pay him after what happened off the field, and you go, Shadeur's got character problems, we don't want him. It's quite the double standard, in my opinion. But yeah, really interesting. Don't understand it from the Browns whatsoever, but can't say I'm surprised that that organization decided to make a move like that. Caleb, before we get you out of here, is there any closing statements, anything that's been on your mind lately? Obviously, we leave the last couple minutes of each episode to just kind of get your thoughts out there. What's been sticking out to you lately out there in the wide world of sports?
Well, firstly, I want to say I'm so afraid of what the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be able to do next year. Their receiving core consists of Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Emeka Ibuka, Jalen McMillan, Sterling Shepard, and Trey Palmer, with Cade Otton, who is a very solid tight end catching passes, and then Bucky Irving in the backfield. That offense is insane. Jalen McMillan being your fourth receiver with the kind of year that he had last year, I think is absolutely nuts. I know you have a lot of confidence in Jalen being a Husky, but yeah, that's crazy. Just watched Celtics Magic game 4. I have all the respect for Jason Tatum in the world as a champion. That game was soft for Tatum. Didn't love it. And finally, Cooper Flag, if you're listening, obviously we're excited. We'd have you on whenever. But why not strong arm your way to the Wizards?
I like it. I like it.
That's
Just
what
a
I
little
have. That's what I have for you.
I think, the last athlete that said he was going to strong arm his way to a team and was supposed to be a top pick. I think we just talked about him for a little bit. Didn't work out too well. Hopefully it's a different story with Cooper Flag. I'd love to see him in that glorious red, white, and blue Wizards jersey that you so dearly love. Before we get out of here, I'll give my little ramble. Speaking of the Bucks, they also drafted Tez Johnson from Oregon, who I absolutely hated in college, but I do think he's actually a pretty shifty guy, pretty quick, despite what his 40 time was, only being 150 pounds. So watch out for him, special teams especially. He's a shifty guy. My Miami Heat are down 0-3 to the Cavs. I think they play tomorrow. Listen, man, this is my thing that just irritates me so much. Just lose the play-in game. You know you're not going to win in the first round. Just lose the play-in and just put a ping pong ball in there. Just give yourself a chance, man. I like what every year it's okay. Playoffs are in a couple weeks. Probably not going to make the playoff. Let's get a couple losses on the schedule. Let's get this draft process going. Playing champions every year. You hate to see it. Drives me up the wall. Another thing with the NBA playoffs, loving this Pistons Knicks series. Straight out of 1985, just tackling each other. That was 100% a foul at the end of that game. on Malik Beasley's three. I love that they didn't call it
Oh
because they
yeah.
didn't call anything the whole game. So don't call it there.
Hmm.
I love the physicality in the playoffs. It finally shows that they do play defense. I know they get away with a lot of things, but I think that when you look at guys like Kawhi Leonard and Malik Beasley and guys that give effort on the defensive end of the floor, Gary Payton Jr., he's another one. And so
Hmm.
NBA playoffs is just one of the most enjoyable things to watch. We'll get some episodes going on that as we get into the later rounds as well. Caleb, want to thank you for coming on, giving us all your insight, and we appreciate you, man.
Go Stanford.
You heard the man. Have a good one, everybody. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and we will catch you guys next week.